The Honorable the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, amen, namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from the following members who have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, MP, member for Aruka Maloney. The Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, SC, MP, member for Superior. Mr. Esmond Ford, MP, member for Tunapuna, and Dr. Fuad Khan, MP, member for Barataria, San Juan. Additionally, Mr. Russian Parry, MP, member for Miaru, has requested leave of absence for the period November 8th to 17, 2019. The leave which the members seek is granted. Honorable members, I wish to briefly address you on the matter of Standing Order 113, which states as follows: the proceedings of and the evidence taken at a meeting of a select committee or subcommittee and any documents presented to and decisions of such a committee shall not be published by any member thereof or by any other person before the committee has presented its report to the House. I have noted with great concern that in-camera deliberations and decisions of, as well as documents presented to parliamentary committees, have been making their way into the media long before these committees have the opportunity to report to the House. Most recently, the deliberations of the Joint Select Committee on Energy Affairs, held on Wednesday, October 30th, 2019, were divulged to the media without the committee's consent and almost immediately after the committee met. The reporting journalist, one who is experienced and who is a senior parliamentary reporter, gave not only a detailed account of the committee's in-camera deliberations, but also reproduced the contents of a letter addressed by a member of the committee to its chairman. In one instance, the matter was the front page story of the newspaper. Erskine May on parliamentary practice instructs, and it is recognized in virtually every legislature, that premature disclosure of the deliberations and decisions of a committee or of any documents which a committee has under consideration may be treated as contempt. Honorable members, I wish to state at the outset that I view this issue very seriously, and I expect all members to do the same. The work of our parliamentary committees is very important and can only be successful if members can function knowing that their deliberations, which are conducted outside of the glare of the public, can be kept confidential until they choose to report to the House. This confidentiality provides committee members with the atmosphere necessary for free, open, and constructive analysis of the issues before them, particularly procedural issues. The unauthorized disclosure of committee evidence, documents, and decisions is unacceptable and will only serve to undermine and stymie the bipartisan work of our committees. Indeed, committee proceedings, reports, and all documents, including evidence, which were not the subject of a public hearing of the committee, must remain confidential until tabled, and therefore to break this confidentiality is a breach of privilege. A select committee on procedure of the United Kingdom House of Commons of 1989-1990 said the following, and I quote, "All leaks are a breach of the trust amongst the members and staff of a committee, which is essential to its smooth functioning. If leaking becomes the common practice, then there can be a cumulative effect and a general slippage from the standards of responsibility in maintaining committee confidences that rules require. This could damage the standing of select committees in the public eye." End quote. Veteran members are reminded, and less experienced members are advised, that during the 9th Parliament, a similar occurrence was deemed to be a contempt of this House by a previous Committee of Privileges. There are also several other precedents, both here and in other Commonwealth parliaments, of the unauthorized release of committee work being treated as contempt. I therefore wish to denounce in the strongest possible terms this breach of the standing orders and lack of respect for the privileges of the House. The undermining of confidence which will ensue due to unauthorized releases of the committee's in-camera deliberations and confidential documents could be extensive and extremely counterproductive. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to caution all members of this House. It may be accidental or due to inadvertence. It may be the result of negligence, or it may be deliberate release of information. The growing trend of disclosing, leaking, discussing, or sharing committee deliberations, decisions, and documents must be discontinued. This newly developing practice is wholly inconsistent with the dignity of this House, and as guardian of the privileges of this House, I will continue to ensure that there is no obstruction or interference placed on members in the exercise of their duties, whether collectively or individually. I so rule.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Petition lodged by the Attorney General on behalf of Donna Denbo, requesting the use of the Hansard in court proceedings.
The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to present a petition on behalf of Mrs. Donna Denbo, Attorney at Law, of the Law Offices of Dr. Claude Denbo, Senior Counsel, of number 113 Oxford Street, Altus Court, 3rd floor, Port of Spain. I move that the clerk be allowed to read the petition.
Honorable members, is this agreed?
Yes.
Therefore, clerk, please proceed.
In the matter of Standing Order 21 of the Standing Orders of the House of Representatives, and in the matter of the petition of Donna Denbo of the law offices of Dr. Claude Denbo, SC, of number 113 Oxford Street, Altus Court, 3rd floor, Port of Spain, to the Honorable Speaker and members of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in Parliament assembled. The humble petition of Donna Denbo of number 113 Oxford Street, Altus Court, 3rd floor, in the city of Port of Spain, in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, respectfully showeth as follows. Your petitioner is the attorney at law on record for the claimants in the High Court action number CV 2018-03315, the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, and Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago against Nairi Alfonso, practicing as an attorney at law under the name and style of N.D. Alfonso and Co., Intercontinental Shipping Limited, and John Powell. In these proceedings, the claimants seek inter alia the following reliefs against Ms. Nairi Alfonso and the second and third defendants. A declaration of Ms. Alfonso acted in breach of her fiduciary duties owed to the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago while she acted in the capacity of attorney at law by procuring the award of a contract to Intercontinental Shipping Limited as her agent for the hiring of the MV Superfast Galicia. B, a declaration that the defendants derived a pecuniary benefit as a result of Ms. Alfonso's breach of fiduciary duties for which they are liable to account. And C, a declaration that the claimants are entitled to have the defendants account for the profit made from the monies received by them from the claimants for the hiring of the MV Superfast Galicia. 2, Ms. Alfonso was retained inter alia to obtain a vessel for use on the inter-island shipping service, and in early February 2014 identified 5 potential vessels, which included the NV Superfast Galicia. 3, Ms. Alfonso has claimed that after she identified the 5 vessels which could be used on the inter-island shipping service, she dropped out of the picture. 4, the foregoing is inconsistent with the evidence given before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament on Land and Infrastructure on 5th September 2017. 5, it is because of the foregoing contradiction, among many others, that the claimants have been advised by senior counsel that the notes of evidence before the aforementioned Joint Select Committee is an important document to be relied on in the trial of this matter. 6, the petitioner therefore humbly prays that the House of Representatives do grant leave for the clerk of the House or such other officer to swear to an affidavit referring to and exhibiting the said extracts of the verbatim notes of the Joint Select Committee, attesting that they are a true record of what was said by the first defendant in relation to her receipt of an invitation to tender from the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. And your petitioner is duty-bound will ever pray. Dated the 5th day of November, 2019, signed Donna Denbo.
Honorable members, the question is that the petitioner be granted leave to proceed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leave is granted.
Papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Princestown Regional Corporation Chairman's Fund for the year ended September 30th, 2018. 2, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Mayor's Project Fund account of the San Fernando City Corporation for the year ended September 30th, 2017. 3. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the statement of recovery of expenses of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for the year ended December 31st, 2018. 4. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the year ended September 30th, 2015. 5. The audited financial statements of Trinidad and Tobago Free Zones Company Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2018. 6. The consolidated financial statements of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2018. 7. The sector-wide approach loan agreement between the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Corporación Andina de Fomento in the amount of $200 million. 29. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Tobago House of Assembly for the year ended September 30, 2009. 30 to 31. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the San Juan Lavantil Regional Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2014 and September 30th, 2015. 32. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the year ended September 30th, 2016. 33. The audited financial statements of Caroni 1975 Limited for the financial year ended June 30th, 2019. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 to 4 and 29 to 32 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. Papers 5 and 6 and 33 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 4 and 29 to 32 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee, and papers 5 and 6 and 33 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Just before we move on, may I remind all members to ensure that their devices are either in silent mode or switched off. Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 8, the Administrative Report of the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts for fiscal year 2016-17. And paper number 9, the White Paper on the National Policy on Sustainable Community Development for Trinidad and Tobago 2019 to 2024. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the Administrative Report of the University of the West Indies for the fiscal year 2016 to 2017.
The Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, I have the honor to lay the Administrative Report of the Board of Governors of the Cipriani College of Labour and Cooperative Studies for the period October 2015 to September 2016. I also have the honor to lay the Minimum Wages Amendment Order 2019. Thank you very much.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, I have the honor to lay the following papers. The Administrative Report of the Arima Borough Corporation for the period October 1st, 2017 to September 30th, 2018. Papers 13 to 14. The Administrative Report of the Point Fortin Borough Corporation for the periods October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015 and October 1st, 2015 to September 30th, 2016. Papers 15 to 16. The Administrative Report of the San Fernando City Corporation for the periods October 1st, 2016 to September 30th, 2017 and October 1st, 2017 to September 30th, 2018. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Works and Transport, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the Point Lisas Industrial Port Development Corporation Limited for the year 2016.
The Minister of Public Administration.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Public Administration, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the Statutory Authority Service Commission for the year ended September 30th, 2018.
The Leader of the House.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers, 20 to 21. The responses to the 17th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the expenditure and internal controls of the East Port of Spain Development Company Limited. The responses are from the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of National Security. Paper number 22, the ministerial response to the Ministry of National Security to the 11th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on the status of the implementation of the recommendations of the 3rd report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity into the treatment of child offenders. Paper number 23, the ministerial response of the Office of the Prime Minister to the 12th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on the sexual exploitation of children in Trinidad and Tobago, with specific focus on child prostitution and child pornography. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers in my name. The annual report of the Police Complaints Authority for the period October 1st, 2017 to September 30th, 2018, and also the Family Proceedings Amendment Rules 2019.
The Minister of Trade and Industry.
Many thanks again, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Trade and Industry, I have the honor to lay paper number 26, the Trinidad and Tobago Trade Policy 2019 to 2023.
The Minister of Planning and Development.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Planning and Development, I have the honor to lay the Water Pollution Rules 2019.
The Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation vesting amendment to the first schedule number 2 order 2019.
Reports from committees.
The Member for Faizabad.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the 18th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on the examination of the statements of expenditure for the first, second, and third quarters, as well as the month ending July 31st of the financial year 2018-2019, with respect to recurrent expenditure, development program, consolidated fund, and infrastructure and development fund.
The Member for Caroni Central.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the following reports. The 25th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the National Lotteries Control Board, NLCB, for the years 2008 to 2012, and the NLCB's expenditure on internal controls during this period. Also, the 27th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the expenditure and internal controls of the National Carnival Commission of Trinidad and Tobago for the years 2010 to 18.
Member for St. Anne's East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the following 2 reports. Report number 4, the 13th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. Report number 5, the 14th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on sexual harassment in the education sector. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Oropouche West.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the 7th report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs on an inquiry into the wider application of non-custodial penalties in the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago.
The member for Camuto Manzanilla.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the following reports. Number 7, the 11th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on a follow-up inquiry into the effectiveness of the state's interventions directed at socially displaced persons. Number 8, the 12th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an examination of the current level of childhood obesity and the state's interventions to promote a healthy lifestyle among children.
Member for Laventille West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the distinct honor to present the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Private Security Industry Bill 2019 in the 5th session of the 11th Parliament.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of National Security, could the Minister inform this House whether an official investigation has been launched into allegations by Lieutenant Carla Cameo Weaver of a massive cover-up of rampant and uncontrolled sexual abuse in the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at the outset, I think I'd like to take the opportunity at this stage to recognize the young officers, the young boys and girls from a cadet force who are sitting here in Parliament to observe today's proceedings. Welcome and good afternoon. Madam Speaker, immediately upon seeing in the newspaper, reported by the media, that there were some allegations being made by a former Lieutenant Carla Cameo Weaver, I made inquiries at the Ministry of National Security of the Permanent Secretary. And I also asked for a report. I'm glad to advise that when these allegations were made, there was an investigation by a Cadet Force Board of Inquiry, also with respect to certain specific allegations, and it's not rampant and uncontrolled abuse. Those matters were immediately reported to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for investigations by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to be carried out, and it is my understanding that those investigations are afoot. Madam Speaker, I have also asked the Chief of Defence Staff to look at the whole Cadet Force operation and to come back to me with suggestions as to how the Cadet Force can be reinvigorated and also ramped up as per the conversations we've been having in the Parliament over a course of time.
Supplemental, member for Couva South.
Minister, are you telling the House that the investigations which have been launched, that has not been completed in terms of a formal report that has been handed into you or the Chief of Defence Staff?
Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As I said, a board of inquiry was done. That was an internal matter in the Cadet Force. I have asked the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Security to follow up on this and to also get a report with respect to all of these allegations that I've now seen published in the newspaper.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Education, given the recent incident involving a 5-year-old pupil of the San Fernando Boys RC School slashing another pupil's head Could the minister indicate whether he has requested an investigation into the matter?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. An investigation has been requested and a formal report is expected shortly. Thank you.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Given that San Fernando Boys RC is considered a prestige school attended by the member for San Fernando East and also 3 of my 4 children, could the minister tell us what has happened to that school that such an incident could occur?
I'm not going to permit that as a question, a supplemental question. Member for Naparima.
To the Minister of Public Utilities. Given that residents of Sahai Trace, St. Cross Road, Irie Village Branch Road, Lengua Village, and Kunjal Road have been without water within the past month, could the minister state when the residents will receive their water supply?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Very much, Madam Speaker. And thank you for the question because it allows me the opportunity to come to this House almost abreast to bring the population a little bit up to date on the matters. The areas of concern, as was described, was asked, they are serviced by the Navet Water Treatment Plant. The Navet Water Treatment Plant is presently below its long-term average, which is about 38.5% now versus its long-term average of 81.8%. It's interesting to note that the rainfall in the month of October, as much as we are seeing rain in that particular area is actually 32.6% lower than it was last year. And for the period January to October, it is 294 milliliters below what was supposed to be last year. So we have been experiencing issues as a result of that. The Navet water treatment, the Navet Dam, we have cut production by half to 10 million gallons of water a day, and as such, those areas that you raise are experiencing difficulty, including a lot of other areas that are serviced by Navet and the Hollis Dam in particular. That being said, we are looking within the next 48 to 96 hours to try to see if we could get some more water there in that particular area and augment it by truck-borne water supply.
Thank you.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Thank you. Given that we are now in the rainy season and residents are, as you indicated, they're not getting a regular supply, what comfort could you provide for adequate supplies during the dry season?
Well, Madam Speaker, part of the reasons why we have cut back the production in Navet, in Hollis, in some of our jams, and we are experiencing the problem now, is because we are forward-thinking and planning for the dry season next year. So the reason why we are down to 10 is because we want to ensure that we will be able to have water next year to supply the areas. So that's part of the reason. We are also in the process of refurbishing all of our wells. We are in the process of drilling new wells. We are in an extensive program in also fixing some of the leaks and also changing out some of the pipes, all geared towards preparing ourselves for the dry season next year.
Could the minister give us some measurable indication of the new wells that are being drilled? How many gallons or millions of gallons of water incrementally would be brought into the system to satisfy the residents of Naparima?
Minister of Public Utilities.
We are hoping from our well program to at least get about 5 million gallons of water additional from the groundwater supply of water. So in that, we hope to get about 5 million gallons of water. Again, if you also notice, we have also been on an extensive program in trying to get people to conserve water. The reality is that 240 million gallons of water, if we add another 5, that's 245 million gallons of water. That is sufficient water for us for a population of 1.3 million people. We have also been doing a lot of work in also being able to increase our boosters to be able to push the water from central Trinidad and other areas out to the extremities. So there are a number of areas, a number of things that we have put in place. We are suffering now because of reductions in our dams, and we are working to, as I said, augment that by groundwater and drilling for some new wells and encouraging the population to practice some degree of conservation. Because if we do this, we will be in a position to be able to ride through this period and the dry period next year.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are 3 questions for oral answer, and the government will be answering all 3. Thank you very much.
Member for Vancouver South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 1 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, the Chief Personal Officer will be authorized in the near future to make an offer to public sector bargaining agents, including the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, with respect to outstanding collective agreements.
Supplemental, Member for Vancouver South.
Madam Speaker, guide me here, because what I'm going to ask, I don't know if the Minister of Finance will be in the line. He's not being the line minister. Could I direct it to the Minister or the Minister of Education?
Well, first your question must be asked and allowed.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Taking into consideration that there have already been 2 disruptions since the academic year has begun as a result of the current state of negotiation, could the Minister inform this House what plans are being put in place as it relates to the completion of school-based assignments in terms of it being marked and handed in, and also preparing students in Form 5 and 6 for CSEC and CAPE examination?
Okay, so that's out of order as a supplemental question.
Totally out of order.
Member for Vancouver South.
And you very well know that too.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 2 to the Minister of Communication.
Minister of Communications.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister made and registered a public complaint about the BBC's intentionally erroneous report on Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuelan migrants in September 2019. The Honorable Prime Minister's public complaint was carried extensively in the local and foreign press.
Supplemental, Member for Vancouver South.
So, thank you, Madam Speaker. So, could the Minister simply advise this House that there has been no formal correspondence between the Office of the Prime Minister and the BBC or the regulator in the United Kingdom?
I believe that question was the original question which was asked and answered. You have another supplemental question? Supplemental, yes. Member for Vancouver South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since the pronouncement of the Prime Minister and the formal closure of the registration process, is the Minister in a position to inform this House how many Venezuelan nationals continue to come ashore to Trinidad and Tobago?
Once again, I have to rule that supplemental question as out of order. Member for Vancouver South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've advised you in keeping with Standing Order 29, sub 14, that I am no longer pursuing this question.
Okay, thank you. So leave is granted.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of
All right,
the House.
order, please.
on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 17 of the House of Representatives, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the House for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the incidence of the H1n1 virus in Trinidad and Tobago and its management by the Ministry of Health. The matter is definite because it concerns the increasing occurrence of the H1n1 infection nationally, which requires urgent measures to be undertaken by the Ministry of Health. The matter is urgent because the H1n1 virus is highly contagious, dangerous, and if left unchecked, could result in a major national epidemic. The matter is of public importance because this highly infectious and contagious virus can cause serious health effects to citizens in their homes, private spaces and institutions, workplaces, public spaces, and to children in our schools. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member, I'm not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 17 of the House of Representatives, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the House at today's sitting for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely, the need for the government to make public the Jacqueline Wilson-led committee report into the termination of an employee at the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs. The matter is definite because it pertains to the refusal by the government to openly and transparently account for the use of state funds in the settlement of a private matter involving a government official. The matter is urgent because new information has found its way into the public domain that contradicts the government's utterances and assurances, creating public distrust in the holders of high office. The matter is of public importance because it creates a strong perception that public funds have been abused in the handling of this matter, and public trust and confidence can be eroded in the cabinet and the government as a result. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order.
Statements by ministers.
The Minister of Trade and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I'm authorized by the Cabinet to make the following statement. Trinidad and Tobago's Trade Policy 2019-23 was officially launched in September 25th of this year. Implementation has already begun, and in the medium to long term, this trade policy will set Trinidad and Tobago on a course for delivering broad-based export growth, particularly in high-value exports. The Ministry of Trade and Industry collaborated with the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean on this exercise. The involvement of UNECLAC is as a result of the visit of the Prime Minister, Dr. the Honourable Keith Rowley, to Chile in May 2017, and the outcome of discussions there with UNECLAC's Executive Secretary, Alicia Barcena. And Madam Speaker, when our Prime Minister travels, he delivers. The policy is also the result of an extensive consultative process, including 23 consultation sessions with approximately 33 stakeholders from the public and private sectors and the Tobago House of Assembly. This process was further complemented by robust empirical and econometric analysis provided by UNECLAC, including the use of analytical tools such as the Grubel-Lloyd intra-industry and trade complementarity indices. Our stakeholders have been working alongside us, providing feedback and input when called upon, which we sincerely appreciate. We know that the country's exports are far too specialized in a few products when compared to the world average, or even when compared with other similarly sized economies. Transforming Trinidad and Tobago's economy to one that increasingly exports high-value goods and services is a crucial first step. To achieve this, the policy promotes comparative advantage-based production and continuous upward movement along the value chain. The government will therefore pursue specific trade-related policies geared towards enhancing competitiveness, accelerating economic and export expansion, and increasing the country's foreign exchange earning potential. To that end, 5 main goals have been identified that will be pursued over the next 5 years. The establishment of a more facilitative and enabling business and trade environment in Trinidad and Tobago. Increased exports of non-energy goods and services. Increased production and exports of high value-added goods and services. To secure a larger share of CARICOM trade, inclusive of trade and services. And also to expand Trinidad and Tobago's market share within the country's traditional and non-traditional markets. The policy contains a series of firsts for Trinidad and Tobago. For the first time in any national trade or related policy, recommendations have been made to include the development and production of the green industry, including green products and services. Measures to promote environmentally friendly practices and production methods within export sectors are also included in the policy. Additionally, Tobago is explicitly treated with, particularly in relation to the development of the services export. The Ministry is cognizant of the nascent trade potential which exists in Tobago and will collaborate with the THA to develop capacity to formulate supporting trade policy initiatives for the development of business competitiveness. Another first is the development of measures to promote the inclusion of women, youth, and persons with disabilities in trade. And this signals the government's commitment to identifying, understanding, and removing obstacles to the full participations of all citizens in trade and development. With regard to target markets, our exports of goods and services will be focused on the following markets: the wider Caribbean, South and Central America, Asia and Europe, and our diaspora in the USA. In relation to goods, the policy has targeted the production and export of high value-added products such as electronic assembly items, textiles and garments for the fashion industry, pharmaceutical products, cosmetics, downstream aluminium products, downstream petrochemical products, wood and wood products, to name a few. Of note, products from the agriculture and agro-processing industry are also targeted, and among these are vegetables and fruit, cocoa and spices, animal feed, miscellaneous food products and beverages, fish and fish processing products as well. In relation to services, several strategic sectors for development and export expansion have been identified, and these include tourism, education, medical and health and wellness, creative industries and entertainment, professional services, ICTs, and financial services. For many years, a major challenge for this country has been identifying and taking the appropriate steps necessary to increase the scope, the quality, and the efficiency of targeted services sectors. This policy outlines the steps to upgrade business services infrastructure, improve capacity for e-commerce, and develop human capital with the aim of attracting foreign investment and making business services more competitive and viable as an export sector. In addition to answering the questions of what should Trinidad and Tobago export and to which markets, the policy identifies a series of cross-cutting measures that will support the efforts to increase trade, diversify markets, and achieve the goals and objectives. And these measures include innovation, efficient management, utilization, and enforcement of intellectual property rights, modernizing key economic infrastructure, particularly in the areas of energy and transport and ICTs, to facilitate economic activity, and also improving trade financing to address challenges faced by traders, particularly micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and those in the services and other emerging sectors. The new trade policy also identifies private sector development as key to export diversification. Measures to ensure that active engagement of the private sector and civil society in determining the country's trade agenda are included. Mechanisms are identified to ensure that exporters and trade negotiators are aware of non-tariff barriers applied by the country's trading partners and ways to effectively reduce or eliminate them. And this includes the establishment of a national non-tariff barrier committee with public and private sector participation. and also the development of export platforms and guidelines and buyer profiles in countries of interest will also support market intelligence activities. Based on lessons learned, it was determined that successful implementation hinges on a robust monitoring and evaluation framework both at the policy and projects levels. The M&E framework that accompanies the policy maps its implementation throughout its lifespan. Several institutional measures will be pursued, including the establishment of a cross-agency implementation committee and trade policy technical working group. The latter, in particular, will be comprised of officials of the Ministry of Trade and Industry and focal points selected from the private and public sectors, civil society, academia, and key development partners. The functions of these committees are laid out in the policy, and their reports will be made public through various means, including the transparency and predictability that were among our key guiding principles. I urge my colleagues to read the trade policy. It illustrates that the way in which we think about trade and doing business must evolve if we want to keep pace with global developments and put Trinidad and Tobago and its export products and services in the frame of global trade. The policy is for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is reflective of where Trinidad and Tobago is and where it must go. The practical and feasible steps prescribed have been deliberately crafted based on the contributions of our stakeholders. With this policy, a national trade policy for Trinidad and Tobago aligned to the national development goals, this country's trade outlook is on a progressive footing. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One question to the Honourable Minister. Based on your policy and policy outlook, what sector or industry do you anticipate that you are likely to see the highest level of export growth during the fiscal year in which we have entered?
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you. And I just named these in my short discourse. I named the types of industries. I named several. But if I am to name any at all, it is certainly the manufacturing of goods and the expansion of the manufacturing industry as it is, and certainly the growth in the agro-processing sector as well. But particular focus will be placed on the services sector, in particular the tourism sector, and also we're looking at the education sector as well. But I named all of these, and I would encourage you to read the trade policy for the details. Yes, thank you.
Personal explanation. Introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister. Public business, government business, bills second reading.
The Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 5550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, it's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity here today to pilot what we believe is a significant and an important piece of legislation. And we see today, and as I say we, I hope that I can speak collectively on behalf of all of the members of Parliament present, as this bill being a significant step which directly affects the lives of prison officers, fire officers, immigration officers, police officers, customs officers, collectively under this piece of legislation, or law enforcement officers. And at the outset, Madam Speaker, through you, I would like to thank all of those who worked diligently and assiduously on producing this piece of legislation. And in particular, I single out for thanks the Prison Officer Association, led by Mr. Saran Richards, him and his officers, sitting side by side with the Attorney General, the Honorable Member for San Fernando West, and the former Minister of National Security, the Honorable Member for Point Fortin, at the outset, just over a year and a bit ago, sitting and working with them, along with the staff in the Ministry of National Security and the Attorney General's office, to produce what we've come here to debate today. Madam Speaker, this bill captures, via a wide and useful net, many issues that currently confront us in national security, and particularly the safety and security of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, to go straight to the bill and then to take it through point by point and via a number of live examples, illustrate the need for this particular piece of legislation and how wide-ranging its effects are meant to be, and I believe I'd start off by just laying out for the public the policy and the philosophy behind this important piece of legislation. Madam Speaker, this piece of legislation is meant to protect all of the officers that I've just called, the prison officers or police officers or fire officers, customs and immigration officers, to protect them from a number of offenses that may be committed against them and their families and family members. But also importantly, on the other spectrum, whilst we here as legislators here this afternoon will offer them an increased level of protection by increasing the penalties, the fines and sentences applicable to those who abuse them, threaten them, and do worse than that, we are on the other spectrum holding them to a different level of accountability and a higher level of accountability. And this particular piece of legislation here today is meant to also tell all of those officers that whilst we are committed to their protection, we are also holding them to a higher level and a standard. And should they commit any offenses, we will also be increasing the penalties associated with their breaches of their duties. The bill starts off, Madam Speaker, with a most important amendment to Section 6.2 of the Criminal Law, Chapter 1004. And this, quite simply, is that what we're doing is increasing the penalty for false reporting. You see, Madam Speaker, over the period of time, there has developed this phenomenon, and we're facing it, especially with our E99 service, where persons believe it is appropriate or it is acceptable for them to call in and make false reports to our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So immediately, one of the first ills in our society that we're seeking to address by this piece of legislation is to increase the penalties where a person causes the wasteful employment of the police time by knowingly making a false report. We have had a number of instances, not only to the police, but to other areas of our national security apparatus, where persons are calling in false reports. So the first ill we address is that. The bill then moves, Madam Speaker, to deal with prison officers. And at the outset, I'd like to say that coming into the substantive chair of national security just over a year ago, it was a very difficult period as the minister, as well as being a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, because unfortunately within the first month and a half of being the minister, we suffered the murders of 2 of our prison officers. Over the past decade, there have been a number of unfortunate incidents where some of our prison officers have lost their lives. This is something, Madam Speaker, that it always hurt me to see being used as a political football. But I stand here today and tell the Prison Officers Association, as well as the families of all prison officers, that today this government has seen it fit. We've heard their cries and their pleas to find yet another method, another methodology of offering protection to prison officers by increasing the fines, the penalties for anyone who assaults or takes any retaliation or retaliatory action against prison officers. And what we say by this piece of legislation, I start off by this, with this specific clause, Madam Speaker, in dealing with prison officers, because this is to be coupled with or married with the other actions that we're taking at national security to protect prison officers, by providing them with stab vests, by providing them with increased number of handguns and firearms, by using a multi-agency task force. The police service and the defense force, and I thank them for it, are now working with our prison services. And the amendments we're making under the Prison Services Act, as I'll get into, are all targeted at protecting prison officers, even where we increase the penalties for breaches of duty by prison officers. Because you see, Madam Speaker, in the prison sphere, there's a special phenomenon. It is such a limited area and also a limited number of officers that any prison officer, it is a typical case of one bad apple spoiling it for the whole barrel. Because any prison officer who commits or breaches the law, enters into smuggling or trafficking within the prisons, banned substances, even bringing in cell phones and these types of devices, now makes it dangerous for other prison officers. And I will get into some of that. So what we start off by doing is offering specific protection or additional protection for prison officers, where we say that any person who assaults, threatens, obstructs, or resists, or aids or incites any other person to assault, threaten, obstruct, or resist a prison officer in the execution of his duties, and where they take action and retaliatory action against prison officers. What we've done, Madam Speaker, is we're seeking here today to increase the fines on summary conviction and on indictment to protect prison officers. So in other words, the strong message that we're sending today to those who may have this awful intention of harming prison officers, what we're asking all legislators here today to join with us in passing this legislation to offer that additional layer of protection by increasing the penalties with respect to anyone who thinks that they can harm our prison officers. What we're also looking at doing at Clause 3 of this bill, which deals with the amendments to the Prison Act, Madam Speaker, is dealing specifically with this unfortunate phenomenon that has grown in the prison system of smuggling contraband into prisons. And when you go to the bill, Madam Speaker, I'd like to start by just telling the population what we're now defining as prohibited articles. And prohibited articles are the articles that we're saying are contraband and shouldn't be brought into the prisons. Dangerous drugs, explosives, firearms, ammunition, artillery, weapons, mobile telephones. And I stick a pin here, Madam Speaker. We are facing in the prison system for all too long now the use of smuggled and contraband mobile phones by prisoners. And despite the use of technology, because unfortunately, technology evolves very quickly, there is still too much. One phone inside is one too much, but there's still too many mobile telephones being used by those who are incarcerated. So we're now tackling that frontally with this legislation. So cameras, sound recording devices, electronic devices, information technology equipment, alcohol, tobacco, money, clothing, food, drinks, letters, paper, books, tools or other articles likely to be prejudicial to the safety, security, good order, and discipline of prisons. For example, knives and other makeshift weapons. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the prison service. Well, not thank, congratulate the prison service. I'd also like to thank the U.S. Embassy, who's donated some dogs to our prison service. We have been doing a much better job at preventing contraband from entering the prison system. And we're also now going to be introducing the use of a multi-agency task force, the addition of the police service and the defense force to offer an extra layer of protection for prison officers when we search persons coming and going from certain prisons in the prison service. So we're also saying that this now covers, and we list out the prisons, the Port of Spain prison and others, the Golden Grove prison, maximum security prison at Golden Grove, remand prison, the women's prison at Golden Grove, the Eastern Correctional Rehabilitation Center, the Carrera convict prison, the Tobago convict prison, and other convict depots and prisons that may be declared by the Minister of National Security. And what we're saying now is anyone who brings prohibited articles into the prison environment, what we call smuggling contraband into prisons, we are increasing the fines. We're now making that an offense and saying you're committing an offense and you can be liable either on summary or indictable conviction for smuggling contraband into the prisons. This in of itself also adds another layer of protection for prison officers, because we will now be able to increase the levels of penalties for persons who bring, through, convey, or cause prohibited articles to be supplied to a prisoner. And we've sought through Clause 3C, which is to be a new Clause 8 in the Prisons Services Act, to capture, as best as we see it, the smuggling of contraband into prisons and increasing the penalties. We're also, Madam Speaker, as I said at the outset, we're also targeting errant and corrupt prison officers here, because you will see that we're now also saying that where a prison officer commits this offense, he or she shall be liable, and we've actually put higher penalties on prison officers than we're putting on other persons who may breach this particular section, this relevant provision. And the message that we're sending to prison officers is, whilst we are prepared to protect you and to help you in the line of your duty, we also are holding you to a higher standard and a higher level, in that if you breach this and you engage in smuggling contraband into the prisons, you will be subject to a higher penalty. We then go on to deal with trafficking in prisons by prison officers. Because you see, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, over time, there has been a phenomenon that has developed where we have prison officers who are assisting, or who may be assisting, the criminal elements who are incarcerated in prisons in carrying out their business transactions on the outside. So again, we're sending a strong signal, we believe, to prison officers that if you engage in this type of behavior and you are going to be part of the criminality, we are increasing the penalties that you will be subject to. I will be asking the Attorney General with future legislation for us also to look at specific provisions in law that anyone who is found to be assisting any criminal element in conducting or carrying out business transactions which are involved in criminality, that we target them specifically. As you see, Madam Speaker, within recent times, there have been certain utterances over a year ago by myself and recently by the Commissioner of Police, where the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago has had the audacity to challenge what is being said, and also rather simply, in my mind, to ask that the evidence be provided to them. But it's the Commissioner of Police, and the Commissioner of Police is the one who has the evidence and will lead the charge with the conviction and prosecution of any lawyer who engages in criminal activity. So I will be asking the Attorney General to bring legislation to deal with not only lawyers, but other persons who may be assisting criminals in carrying out their criminal empires on the outside. But today, this specific piece of legislation, Madam Speaker, at the new Section 8A of the Prisons Act, is dealing with any prison officers who accept presents or consideration from prisoners, who bring into prison or attempt to bring into prison or carry into prison any article for prisoners, or either directly or indirectly have any pecuniary interest or derive any benefits from prisoners on the outside, or where they're assisting them with dealings. We're making it an offense, and we're saying to the prison officers, when you do this, what you're doing is making it a more dangerous environment, not only for your fellow officers, but also for society as a whole. The next clause, Madam Speaker, and I was telling the Honorable Attorney General this afternoon, this, in my view, is one of the most significant clauses in dealing with what is taking place in our nation's prisons today. And that's the new clause 8B, which is titled Other Offenses Related to Prison Security. This new clause 8B is specifically to deal with persons on the inside or on the outside, persons on the inside of prison, incarcerated persons who are communicating with persons on the outside. So we're seeing those who take prison officers or prisoners who take photographs, make sound recordings inside a prison, and then transmit or cause to be transmitted any image, sound from inside a prison by electronic communications for simultaneous reception outside the prisons. And these types of behaviors are now going to be committing a specific offense. So for example, Madam Speaker, first of all, we're saying you should not have cell phones and other devices that can transmit social media to the outside world. Secondly, we're saying that if you use these devices to so transmit what is taking place in the prisons to the outside world, it's now a specific offense. But most importantly, what I believe this specific clause captures, and it will help us by great leaps and bounds in the fight against the criminality in the prisons. If persons have devices and they're making WhatsApp calls, what we call voice over internet protocol type calls, they're using calls and using these devices to communicate with persons on the outside, it is now a specific offense. And it shows that we are targeting this area of criminality that is going on in the prisons. Because you see, for too long, Madam Speaker, those who are incarcerated and supposed to be facing a loss of their liberty and their rights are continuing to conduct their criminal empires from within the prisons. And this particular clause, and also to call nefarious acts and call for criminality and attacks on persons outside of the prisons. So what we're saying here now is that act in and of itself will be constituted as a specific crime. And we're also saying that any prison officers who engage in this type of activity, they will also now, for the first time, be subject to particular penalties. We have caught it by also saying defining what devices mean. And a device means any electronic programmable device used whether by itself or part of a computer network, electronic communications network, or any other device or equipment or any part thereof to perform predetermined arithmetic, logical, routing, or storage operations using scientific and technical language to capture the use of cell phones, the use of the hotspots, so persons then go on other devices like tablets, etc., to communicate with the outside world. We are targeting that. We've been targeting it via more searches in the prisons, via trying to search persons going in and outside of prisons through the use of our K9 division and these types of things, and we're now making it a specific crime. It also does capture what we've seen by persons transmitting photographs or other documents, and we've defined what documents are via electronic means to the outside world from within the prisons. Madam Speaker, these, what may seem to be simple amendments, will go a long way in fighting the criminality and protecting our prison officers in the prison system of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, this bill also seeks to target with respect to prisons, at new clause 10, we're now dealing with prison officers, at clause 8C, new 8C, prison officers who accept bribes. Once again, we're saying to prison officers, whilst we're prepared to protect you, we will also deal with prison officers who we find to be accepting bribes for rewards, perks, and these other things to help persons carry out their criminal acts. Tipping off throughout the whole of this piece of legislation with the prison officers, police officers, customs officers, immigration officers, and fire officers we've introduced and we're dealing with, for the first time, an offense of tipping off. So, for example, a sting operation is set up, or we're about to conduct some operation, and any prison officer, any police officer, any fire officer, immigration officer, customs officer, who then decides to tip off the criminal element or those who we're targeting, we're making this a crime. That is for the obvious reasons of protecting the operation, as well as protecting those and ensuring a better chance of success of those who are conducting the operation. What we've done here, however, is we've protected attorneys throughout, professional legal advisors, that if they're in conversation with their clients, that they can't be charged. But of course, if it is engaging in criminal activity, that will fall foul of the law. Madam Speaker, this bill also then goes on, as I said, with the introduction of a new Chapter 11 to protect against assaults or retaliatory action against prison officers. And what we're saying to persons on the outside, and this is specifically drafted and intends to deal with the threatening of prison officers and the worst case scenario, the taking of a life or the attempting of taking of life of prison officers. We are saying here today as legislators that we will not tolerate this type of behavior. We then move, Madam Speaker, to deal with the police service. And similarly, when dealing with the police service, Madam Speaker, under this piece of legislation, what we've done is we're saying anyone now, we're increasing the penalties. That's both on the sentencing side as well as the fine side. Anyone who's assaulting, restricting, or obstructing an officer in the exercise of their specified functions. This type of legislation is found throughout the world, Madam Speaker. I looked at the legislation in places like the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, 2 other Commonwealth jurisdictions, and this was used and utilized in drafting and coming up with these amendments to the legislation. We're seeing all too often now that when police officers are carrying out and conducting their lawful duties, in particular, for example, when they go into communities or they go into areas to deal with the criminal element or to go and conduct inquiries, unfortunately, there has grown this phenomenon of attacking, assaulting, blocking and obstructing police officers in the course of their duty. And that is something that this government is not prepared to tolerate. Also, on an operational level, in our conversations with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, we've made suggestions to them as to how they should conduct these types of operations. But the message that we can send here today, Madam Speaker, as legislators, is a specific message that we in here, all 41 of us, will not tolerate persons who decide to assault or obstruct our police officers in the carrying out of their lawful duties. And I ask that we all give consideration to that here today. What we're doing is seeking to introduce a new 53A to do with the police service. And again, we're introducing the crime of tipping off. Madam Speaker, we have had incidents for time immemorial where, unfortunately, there are elements in the police service who are less than honorable. I'll put it that way. And we've had incidents where we have planned operations, we've launched operations. For example, some of the recent operations where we're going after houses of ill repute. We have planned these operations, we've monitored these houses, we know the types of activities that are taking place. And on the nights or the days that we launch the operation, woe and behold, when the police service arrives at the place of ill repute, no one there, no activity going on there. Of course, there's a lot of anecdotal talk as to the tipping off that may have gone on. We've had a not too recent incident where actually we ran a sting operation to see whether we could catch who it was tipping off. So you went from outside of the police district, did what needed to be done, and then when we were on the ground, let the specific police station know, okay, we've gone now to raid this house. And lo and behold, a call comes to the phone in the house from an officer at the station to say, watch it, they come in. But of course, fortunately, in that incident, it was answered by the police officers who carried out the operation. I take this opportunity to say that the strong message that we're sending and signal that we're sending here today is that this will not be tolerated. We're creating a specific offense to deal with this type of activity. I hasten to add, Madam Speaker, that it is only a few bad apples in the barrel. And I have found that many, many police officers, and I take the opportunity to thank them, on a daily basis, put their lives on the line to protect us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And we thank them for that. What we're also seeking to do under this piece of legislation, in particular with the police, is we're increasing the penalty where persons refuse to give measurements, photographs, or fingerprint impressions. So those who are obstructing via that methodology, we're increasing the penalties. What we've also sought to do by Section 53, Madam Speaker, is increase the penalties for serious offenses committed by police officers, including pawning, selling, transferring, loaning, or making available their arms. Again, we've heard all too often the anecdotal stories of police officers renting their firearms to the criminal element. So today we have the opportunity to tackle that type of behavior and to make it a specific offense. Well, not make it a specific offense, but rather to increase the penalties for doing this. So when you transfer, loan, make available your firearm or other clothing, just yesterday, Madam Speaker, in the last 24 hours, we've had a most disturbing incident where it is seen that 3 persons, fortunately, were caught and arrested by the police whilst committing a robbery. 2 of the persons were found wearing what appears to be police-issued uniforms. One of them, again, with this AR-15 type of firearm, another one with a Glock handgun. So we're saying now, and right now those investigations are taking place, but we're saying that if any police officer engages in loaning his or her uniform, we also had it in a kidnapping, a high-profile kidnapping in September or October of last year, where the kidnapped victim was stopped by persons in police uniform. So we're making it now, we're increasing the penalties by persons who in the police service may see it fit to rent their uniforms and their firearms out. The blue lights are something that are also being looked at, and we actually have a cabinet policy dealing with that we intended to put into place. Madam Speaker, what we're also doing is where a police officer keeps for his own use or private benefit any article which has been supplied to him at the public expense, we're dealing with that via an offense. We're also increasing the penalty where police officers who are dismissed from the police service refuse or resign their office or otherwise leave the police service. They fail to deliver up every article which was supplied to him or her. So making it a specific offense. When you leave the police service, regardless of the circumstances, you must return all of the equipment, all of the uniforms, everything provided to you. Again, this is being specifically done, smartly done, and to target what we see going on outside of there. Unauthorized use or possession of police equipment, we're also increasing the penalties where persons have been found and have no express authorization to keep or to use for their private benefit any article which was supplied to a police officer. This again deals with the renting of police guns and the uniforms on the other side. So we're increasing the penalties on the police officers as well as those who might be the end users. We're also seeking, as we're doing for the prison officers, we're also seeking by a new Section 59 or new Section 59 to address instances where persons assault, threaten, obstruct, or resist police officers while acting in the execution of their duties, or take retaliatory action against a police officer or their relatives. So this phenomenon, this behavior of threatening police officers and their families, prison officers and their families, fire officers, customs, immigration officers, we're not tolerating that. We are also, and this, by Section 60, we are increasing the penalty for refusal to assist a police officer who is, while in the execution of his duties, assaulted or resisted. This is an interesting concept and one that exists in the common law. And what we're doing now is we're putting it into statute and seeking to capture it via legislation, that when a police officer is carrying out his or her duties, if you see him or her being assaulted by people, etc., we're saying you, too, have a duty to try and assist the police officer. Obviously, it wouldn't be to put your life at peril, but it would be to provide that assistance where you can. And we just ask that people be very safe when doing so. This is an interesting one, Madam Speaker. A new section 61(1). We are increasing the penalty where a person knowingly harbors or entertains a police officer while he's on duty, sells or gives intoxicating liquor to a police officer while he's on duty, or induces a police officer to commit a breach of his duty. All too often, Madam Speaker, we've had persons report to us, we've had photographs provided to us of police service vehicles parked outside of establishments that are selling intoxicating liquor. I have had persons send me photographs of officers taking a sip whilst on duty and driving. So what we're seeking to do here is make it safer for both police officers as well as the public, and we're increasing the penalties for both the person who may supply the intoxicating liquor to a police officer who's on duty, as well as to the police officers who may be using it. Section 61(a) is now to provide for instances in which a police officer accepts a bribe, gratuity, perquisite, or reward for the neglect or non-performance of his duty. This is an area that I know the Commissioner of Police is specifically targeting now in his effort to weed out of the police service those officers who may be engaged in corruption. So we're saying, look, if you're accepting bribes or anything from any criminal element or anyone trying to encourage you not to do your duty, that is now going to be a criminal offense, or we're increasing the penalties associated with it. We are also increasing the penalty where a person other than a police officer wears a police uniform, impersonates a police officer without the written authority of the commissioner. So again, we're targeting this phenomenon that we're seeing happening all too often that I mentioned a short while ago. One incident is one too many. When we're seeing persons who are dressing as police officers, persons who are even impersonating police officers, what we're doing is we're seeking to increase the penalties to deal with them. Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much more time?
Your full time ends at 3:07:54.
10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the next part of the bill is dealing with immigration officers. Similar provisions. We have had our immigration officers playing an increasing role within the last couple of years in carrying out law enforcement type activities. For example, as I mentioned a short while ago, when raids are done on houses of ill repute, if there are persons who are found there not to be citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, it becomes an immigration matter. We all know what is happening in our neighbors' land, 7 miles off of the coast. Interestingly, this week, I went with the Coast Guard and members of the media and showed them exactly what the 7 miles looks like. And all of the media were quite shocked to see how small that minuscule expanse of water is between Trinidad and Venezuela. Our immigration officers are called upon more and more these days to assist with other law enforcement officers, including our Coast Guard, our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, other arms of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, to assist in us tackling all types of criminality, including those who are entering our country's borders illegally. I'm happy to say, and I'll use this opportunity to congratulate the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard for the work that they've been doing. All too often it's not carried and it's not sent amongst the population. So now is an appropriate time to thank them In the past few weeks, they have turned back a number of vessels, even when the vessels land here, after we've processed them through immigration, done what needs to be done, they are then escorted by the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard back out of our territorial waters. So for the immigration officers, because this happened when Minister Dillon and myself had visited Point Fortin not too long ago, we were told by the immigration officers there that there were persons who were trying to intimidate, to threaten immigration officers. So again, the Attorney General immediately upon hearing that decided to capture immigration officers under this specific piece of legislation to again offer them another layer of protection. So it is very similar to what I said exists, or what we're looking to bring for prison officers and police officers when they're carrying out their duties. Don't obstruct them, don't assault them, threaten them. We're increasing the penalties for that type of thing. But on the other hand, if we find that you're taking bribes, you're engaging in any corrupt activities, we are increasing the penalties and offenses. Similarly, under Clause 6, we're making amendments to the Fire Service Act, Madam Speaker, and what we're doing is again protecting fire officers by increasing the penalty where a person willfully assaults, threatens, obstructs, resists, or interferes with a fire officer while he's on duty for firefighting or any other purpose of the Fire Services Act. We're also increasing the penalties when they're carrying out for any person who obstructs, resists, interferes, when they're exercising their duties in respect of public premises, and also when they're carrying out or assisting in the preservation of peace. So in other words, don't obstruct our fire officers when they're carrying out their duties. We're increasing the penalties to anyone who does that. Anyone who is threatening, assaulting, threatening, obstructing fire officers or their families, their relatives, friends or property, in other words, threatening their families, we're also providing an offense there. We're also dealing with tipping off with the fire service. Again, if we are carrying out any exercises and any member of the fire service decides to tip off the elements, we're increasing the penalties there. Interestingly, once again, and I thank the Attorney General for this foresight, in Section 54, we're increasing the penalty where a person knowingly harbors or entertains a fire officer while he or she is on duty and sells or gives intoxicating liquor to a fire officer while he or she is on duty. And we assure the fire officers this is for their own protection. Again, we deal with any bribes being paid to fire officers, increasing the penalties to both those who are offering or paying the bribes as well as those who may be accepting it. And we're increasing the penalty where a person not being a fire officer impersonates a member of the fire service. As we know, very often fire officers are called upon to carry out inspections of properties, etc. So lest it be any person is impersonating a fire officer to get into a person's premises, we've increased the penalty there. Madam Speaker, the legislation then goes on to do similar amendments to the Customs Act at Clause 7 of the bill. And once again, we're looking to increase the penalties for specified offenses of persons obstructing and assaulting customs officers in the carrying out of their duty, any retaliatory action taken against customs officers and their families. We've provided for the offense of tipping off. We're increasing the penalties for offenses including maliciously shooting or wounding an officer in the execution of his duties. These are the customs officers. Customs officers, especially those in the enforcement division, it's not often known, are also the ones charged with the responsibility from a law enforcement perspective of on our borders, preventing prohibited goods from coming in our borders. Very often when there are busts that take place of illegal firearms, drugs, narcotics, even animals, etc., our customs officers are called upon as the ones to carry out the duties and to charge people for breach of the Customs Act, amongst other things. We're dealing with the increasing of the penalties to bribe a customs officer, and we're increasing the penalties both against the person offering the bribe as well as the customs officers. So, Madam Speaker, in short, those are the categories of amendments being carried out by this piece of legislation to protect our law enforcement officers, and our law enforcement officers on this instance, our prison officers, our police officers, our immigration officers, our fire officers, and our customs officers. Madam Speaker, we've seen too much, from my humble opinion, too many incidents within the last decade or so of those charged with the responsibility of law enforcement, and only a few finding themselves slip down that slippery slope of corruption. So the message we're sending to them today as the legislators is that will not be tolerated. One of the ways to do that is by increasing the penalties, the sentences, and the fines on these officers if they're found guilty. Today we're introducing a tipping off offense, but on the other hand as well, we recognize that for the law enforcement officers who are intent on fulfilling their oath and fulfilling their duty to protect and serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we need as parliamentarians to offer them an increased level of protection, an increased layer of protection, and that is a strong signal that I'm asking all legislators here today to support this piece of legislation, which will achieve those two, in my view, noble, but more importantly, necessary amendments as our society continues to evolve to provide protection both to the officers, their families, as well as the public of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Law Act, Chapter 1004, the Prisons Act, Chapter 1301, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Customs Act, Chapter 7801, be now read a second time. Member for Naparima.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, they are no longer with us, but I wish to place on record that we welcome the presence of the members of the Cadet Force, an institution critical to our need to provide positive, pro-social alternatives for the next generation of leaders. We look forward to the day when every secondary school in Trinidad and Tobago will have a fully functional and well-resourced cadet force. Madam Speaker, we are here to debate another in a suite of legislation brought to the House and purported by those opposite to reduce crime. In similar vein, Madam Speaker, we had the Anti-Gang Act. We had also the amendments to the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters. We also had the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago. We also had the Customs and Exchange Controls Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act also, the Bail Amendment, and the Cybercrime Bill. And we are here today to discuss the Miscellaneous Provisions Law Enforcement Officers Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, the UNC wishes to indicate from the onset that we will support this bill. We note that it increases dramatically penalties for prohibited articles being brought into and out of prisons, trafficking in prisons for prison officers, and Madam Speaker, I will be dealing with the prison service and the police service. My colleagues will deal with the immigration aspect, the amendments to the Fire Service Act, and the amendments to the Customs Act. As I indicate, I will be paying attention mostly to the prison and police service. So we note that crimes have been, we know that it increases dramatically penalties for accepting bribes, gratuities, or rewards for non-performance of duties. We note also the new crime of tipping off, the aiding prisoners to escape, and threatening or assaulting a prison officer or his family. But, Madam Speaker, this legislation is once again based on the premise that increasing the fines dramatically will serve as a deterrent, and it will reduce crime, whether it is instances of officers engaging in activities that are lawful. And while on the surface, this may appear to have some merit, the UNC wishes to inform the government that they may not get the desired results that they anticipate. We have said it time again, over and over, ad nauseum, that legislation alone will not solve the crime problem in Trinidad. And while we acknowledge this, we remind them that equal attention has to be paid to other aspects of the criminal justice system to ensure that legislation dovetails, and we are not passing additional legislation and increasing fines and bottlenecking a system and therefore making it less able to be effective. So we have law after law has been brought, but we do not hear in the parallel, the equivalent, significant, well-resourced and targeted programs put in place to guide impressionable young people and women away from crime. And I wish to make the point, and we're dealing here with legislation again to increase the fines. And I'm saying, Madam Speaker, if you look at the 2020 budget, $8 billion, and I want to make the point, that $8 billion was allocated for the police and prison services. And I'm dealing with the police and prison services. But less than 2% of the budget, less than 2% has been allocated for the development and redirection of at-risk youth programs like MyLat, MyPad, the Scouting Movement, and the cadets, who we had with us earlier today. So it shows the skewed focus that we have in terms of 98% of the budget being spent on the back end of crime and 2% being spent on reducing the pipeline of young people into the prisons. And our prisons are populated by and large by young males. Madam Speaker, but let us get specifically look at the legislation before us. Section 8A states that a prison officer carries out any business transaction with a prisoner, accepts any present from a prisoner, or has any dealing whereby he obtains a benefit from a prisoner will be liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500,000 and imprisonment for 15 years, or on conviction on indictment to a fine of $750,000 and imprisonment for 20 years. We have 8C. And Madam Speaker, when you look at this new legislation, it is based not on empirical data, but on anecdotal evidence. We heard the Minister of National Security saying today that we know there are reports of a sting operation and a phone call, etc. What we would have preferred on this side, that this new offense should be based on actual, precise data. We should not be relying on anecdotal evidence and hearsay statements. Further, there must be disciplinary mechanisms in place to deal with instances of accepting bribes. If a police officer or prison officer accepts a bribe, there must be internal mechanisms, whether it be internal disciplinary procedures or whether it be in the case of the prison officer, the Public Service Commission, or in the case of a police officer, the Police Service Commission. So we would have expected today to hear that there are 20, 30, 40 disciplinary charges of bribery or accepting gifts in the prison services. And the legislation is premised on that, and it is a precise, targeted attempt to deal with that situation. Madam Speaker, we have passed the stage where we could, the instance of tipping off. Madam Speaker, we heard again that somebody tipped off and people tipped off and whatnot. We are saying on this side that we have reached a stage of maturity that legislation must be based on empirical data. But Madam Speaker, there are reasons, and I'll give reasons why, even though we support this legislation, and we will support, I'll give reasons why we think that it may not achieve the desired effect. Madam Speaker, the suite of legislation which those opposite have brought thus far have produced no convictions. And I remind the government that arrests do not equate to convictions. We have seen if somebody is presumed innocent until he's convicted, then all the legislation that we have passed to date, the suite of legislation to which I have resulted in no convictions, and the Attorney General in his response today or in his contribution may wish to give us instances of convictions that are taking place. Madam Speaker, and the second reason, while legislation may be good, you have to actually catch and convict persons for it to be effective. And I refer, Madam Speaker, to a study that was conducted by the University of the West Indies, the Faculty of Law, and the Center for Criminology, Faculty of Law, and it is entitled A Rare and Arbitrary Fate, Conviction for Murder, the Mandatory Death Penalty, and Reality of Homicide in Trinidad and Tobago. And it states, and I quote, "It is a well-established axiom of penal policy that penal sanctions can only be effective in deterring those who contemplate crime if they are applied with a high degree of certainty and without too long a delay." And this research, which is one of the seminal studies in this area, states that certainty is a prerequisite rather than severity. In other words, if we want to deter crime, the empirical research is telling us that if we want to deter crime, there must be certainty of conviction rather than severity of punishment. All I'm saying is that this legislation, which we support, is premised on information that is not consistent with the data that is available from the University of the West Indies and elsewhere. The same study goes on to say, and delays of several years between crime and punishment of an offender, as occurs in Trinidad and Tobago, blunts the perceived connection between the two, let alone producing problems of memory, loss of interest, and it appears possibility of subordinate weaknesses. Severity only occasionally inflicted will fail to have an impact on those who are willing to take risks. That is the research, Madam Speaker. So we come today, and we have heard that we have increased the crimes, increased the penalties, because we want to send a message to criminals that if they do the crime, they will face serious sanctions. That is inconsistent with the research. Madam Speaker, the research into the crime detection rate is abysmally low, we note, or non-existent. According to TTPS statistics, and a prison officer is intent on committing crime, or a prisoner who is intent on getting a prison officer to commit a crime, to tempt him to commit a crime, he is not going to be so concerned with the severity of the crime. And I'll talk about that a little later. According to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service statistics up to September 2019, burglaries and break-ins, 161 detected, but 1,478 committed. So we are dealing here with the question of the criminal having in his view the certainty of being caught rather than the severity of the crime. General larceny, 137 detected, not convicted, detected, but 1,255 reported. I'm told by my friend 10%. Murders, 31 detected out of 405 reported. Madam Speaker, the problem in Trinidad is not laws, they are not sanctions, they are catching the criminals. Madam Speaker, our time will be better spent if we deal with legislation and whatnot that deal precisely with making it easier for the system, the judicial system, the criminal justice system to function effectively, rather than us looking mostly at passing punitive legislation. Madam Speaker, The same your research showed with respect to murders that nearly 70% of those who were indicted for crimes outside of domestic and interpersonal disputes were not convicted. Madam Speaker, we are in crisis in Trinidad, and we will not solve the problems by significantly by the exercise under which we are here today. Madam Speaker, the last bit of data I'll give in this area, I'm advised that even when persons are arrested and imprisoned for crimes, it is my understanding that the number of murder cases concluded annually bear no relation whatsoever to the 470 plus murders actually recorded annually. So we have murders and we have very few convictions or determination of the cases. So arrest alone and legislation alone with no convictions will not lead to the desired results. We need to ensure and continue to reiterate that the judiciary needs to work on a timely basis. Lengthy criminal trials and limited courts continue to be major problems plaguing the criminal justice system. There needs to be more courts available, etc. Madam Speaker, there are numerous examples in Trinidad where cases are thrown out because of the fact that the evidence is not up to scratch, to use layman's term, that would lead to a conviction, or there are the delays in the system. Reported on TV6 morning edition show on the 26th, July 25th, 2019, one of the prison officers who was suspended after the 2015 prison break broke his silence on what transpired. We're concerned for the prison officers, but the prison officer who was accused and suspended, he broke his silence. Prison officer 2, Lancelot Dunton, said 4 years later, no investigation and no inquiry have taken place, and he's calling on his name to be cleared. And Speaker, you see the problem. We have concern for the prison officers, but the system works in such a way to deny them justice on a timely basis. Officer Dunton still remains on suspension 4 years later. Why, the question we ask, why after 4 years has there been no investigations? Is the system incapable of coming up with timely adjudication of issues and challenges in the prison system? And if we pass more and more legislation, would we not bottleneck the system more? So why is it that all 3 officers, and it's not only Officer Dunton, 3 officers still remain on suspension with no answers given on the because of the lack of investigations and inquiry updates? Madam Speaker, I read in today's Newsday an article by Sean Douglas, in which he states this bill restates the little-known fact that any member of the public is under a legal duty to help a police officer in need. It increases the penalty for refusal to assist the police officer who is, while in the execution of his duty, assaulted or resisted. And it says the penalties increase to 50,000 and 3 years in jail, up from 10,000 and 1 year in jail. Madam Speaker, what does this mean to the layman? We could be fined and imprisoned if we refuse to help a police officer, right, who is being assaulted or somebody's interfering with him in the performance of his duty. Madam Speaker, this needs explanation and it needs education of the citizenry. I am, as I say, very strong. I like to fight. As I say, I'm a descendant of the Americans and we dealt in 1812 with the U.S. Empire. But I would think twice in these days, in these troubled times, to intervene to assist a police officer on pain of recognizing that if I do not do so, I could face imprisonment for 1 year and 50,000 3 years in jail. So it needs explaining. It's explained to me because we would like to obey the law, but at the same time, self-preservation is the first law of nature. Madam Speaker, reason 3, why we think, even though we support the legislation, why it would not achieve its desired result. The bill seeks to, and in this I spoke to a lot of prison officers. And may I tell the minister that our prison officers are hardworking and dedicated, but they feel that they are the stepchildren of the ministry, the stepchild of the Ministry of National Security. And Madam Speaker, when you think of it, prison officers, there are about 20 of them killed in the past couple of years, more than in the other services, but yet they do not get the requisite, they feel that they do not get the requisite attention. And they spoke to me. So some of the things that I'll be talking about today comes from the bowels of prison officers. Madam Speaker, the bill seeks to increase existing penalties. Little children. The bill seeks to introduce existing penalties and introduce new provisions. I'll continue. I wouldn't do like people in. Yeah. The bill seeks to increase existing penalties and introduce new provisions with respect to offenses committed by and against law enforcement officers in the execution of their duties. Under Clause 3 of the bill, the Prison Act will be amended by increasing penalties and prison times in hopes that this will be a deterrent. We have a host of penalties, Madam Speaker. Fines as high as $750,000 and prison time as long as 20 years. While we understand the need for deterrence, and we clearly understand that, these penalties may appear too draconian. We asked the question, and prison officers asked the question, what will become of prison officers' wives and children if a prison officer is found guilty and thus must pay the sum? And it doesn't say or $750,000 or 20 years in prison. It says and. So let us take the salary of a police officer or prison officer under $10,000. Let's assume he's married to a teacher. Let's assume he committed the crime and he ought to pay and he faces the maximum penalty. What do they, in the first place, he takes the 20 years prison. That is okay, he did wrong, and he pays it. But where is the state going to recoup the $750,000? Are they going to go for the house? And if they do that, the wives and children, how will they be affected? And all I'm saying, if we love the prison officers, and if we want to care for their welfare, I'm saying that, and if we want at the same time to punish them if they do the crime, it must not, in terms of the unintended consequences, redound to the children and the wife who was not a party to the crime. Madam Speaker, with such high fines and a lengthy prison sentence, this may lead to bigger problems in future concerning the affected families of the police and prison officers. We are not saying get rid of the fines. You know they'll jump up afterwards and say, Charles say, get rid of the fines. Get them nothing, let them walk free. I am not saying that. I am saying that we should not get rid of the fines and imprisonment, but rather think about the holistic impact on the people who you want to say that you care about. And the other question arises, Madam Speaker. What is the justification for a $750,000 fine, as in the case of a prison officer who breaches Section 8B? Madam Speaker, why not $2 million? Why not $300,000 or $1 million? What is the empirical data showing the differential deterrent effect of each figure quoted? And please don't say this figure has to be aligned with other penalties in other legislation which you have brought to Parliament, because the basis for the penalties may not have made sense in the legislation which you are using to align these penalties with. What we need on this side is somebody to tell us that we have done our studies, we have found that for this kind of offense, the fine of 300,000 or 750,000 or $1 million or $6 million is adequate deterrent for the crime that we are looking at. We understand more punishment is needed. We must also see about the welfare of prison officers. Madam Speaker, on August 19, 2019, Newsday, a prison officer's home was shot in Pleasantville. Prison officer H1n1 Harris, 43, was not at home. At around 1 a.m., he was shot at whilst his daughter, Makita, was asleep when she was awakened by sounds of gunshots. This is the reality they face. Will this law return a sense of security to our prison officers and their families and allow them to feel safer outside of their jobs and in their homes? Madam Speaker, of necessity we might ask, where is the balance between concern for the welfare of police and prison officers on the one hand, as opposed to the need to deal frontally with rogue police officers and rogue prison officers? We have many cases in the past where prison officers have been brutally murdered from hits called from inside the prison walls, where prisoners have access to prohibited articles like cell phones. In the last 28 years, 22 prison officers have been murdered. So we welcome this legislation which says that if you bring in cell phones and prohibited weapons, that you will be fined. But there are questions that the prison officers are concerned about, and they have expressed this to me. They say, in the Trinidad Guardian reported on August 19th this year, that's a couple of weeks ago, that in the last 2 decades, some 19 prison officers have been murdered from hits called in from behind the walls. Many of the killings were reprisals from inmates who used their fellow gang members outside to conduct the attacks. Many of the slain prison guards had no connection with the inmates' grievances, but their killings were used to send a warning to prison guards that they could be harmed for merely enforcing prison rules, such as restrictions on cigarettes, cell phones, and narcotics. How will increasing fines stop hardened criminals from revenge killings against prison officers? If somebody is in prison, because most of the attacks they get is from prisoners, you have someone in a prison for 20 years or for life in the prison, and you are saying by putting a legislation 750,000, 20 more years, that is going to have a deterrent effect. And we are saying maybe consideration needs to be given to the spate of penalties that have been put in place. Madam Speaker, Clause 3 of the bill. By repealing Section 2 of the Prison Act and substituting the following, and it says, a person who assaults, threatens, obstructs, or resists, or aids, or incites any other person to assault, threaten, obstruct, or resist a prison officer in the execution of his duty, or any person aiding or assisting a prison officer in the execution of his duty, with intent to impede, intimidate, etc. A person commits an offense under this section and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $250,000 and to imprisonment for 10 years, or on conviction on indictment to a fine of $500,000 and imprisonment for 15 years. In terms of the person, right, being referred to in the clause, does this apply to prisoners as well? If so, and I ask the question, can a fine of $250,000 and a prison term of 10 years be considered a sufficient deterrent to a prisoner who is already convicted for 20 years and facing life imprisonment? Clause 3, C. By repealing Section 8 of the Prison Act and substituting the following, subject to subsection 2, a person who brings, throws, conveys, causes a prohibited article to be supplied to a prisoner, or brings or throws or conveys a prohibited article from a prison, etc. And it goes on, causes another person to bring, throw, or convey a prohibited article in and out of a prison. Commits an offense, again $250,000 and $500,000. But prohibited article includes, and prison officers are asking, it includes, they say, dangerous, I think the minister enumerated them, dangerous drugs, explosive, no problem with that, firearms, ammunition, artillery, weapons, mobile telephones, camera, sound recording device. But it also includes tobacco, money, clothing, food, drink, letters, books. And while we understand the seriousness of trafficking in contraband goods, does this take into account prison officers' belongings within the dormitory, which is located within the prison? In other words, they are asking for the letter of the law to protect them. I understand in 6 of the 8 prisons, there's a dormitory behind the gates. If you're in the dormitory, you walk in with your clothes, you walk in with, if you smoke, you walk in with money, you walk in with clothing, you may walk in with food, particularly if you're on special medical diet. So all they're asking that where there are dormitories, the law, and it must not be an internal regulation because they want to operate on the letter of the law. They say the law must exempt the dormitories so from the actual prison so that it must not be subjective and left to the goodwill of the commissioner of prison or whoever, Madam Speaker. So we are saying, or they are asking, and I'm saying we are supporting the legislation, but they are asking to do away with the ambiguity. The dormitories must be sufficiently secluded from the actual prison cells so that there is no uncertainty if a prisoner walks through the gate, goes into the dormitory with all the tobacco, money, clothing, food, etc. Madam Speaker, combating the prevalence of prohibited articles within prisons is an ongoing struggle. There are reports of increase in alleged hits being called from the prisons, and we have examples of that. The prison officers are asking, where is the, and they're asking, where is the note that in the Express, January 24th this year, the Commissioner of Prison, Gerald Wilson, said last week 7 bags containing cell phones and other items were thrown over the fence at Golden Grove Prison and collected by inmates working in the garden. And they are just saying it would help them if there are CCTV cameras in the cells. We look on TV on American TV in prison, MSNBC, and there's one officer, and he could monitor everything that is going on in the prison from one place and then call for backup to deal with a fight in cell B, or somebody filming or taking drugs in another cell. The prison officers are saying that they do not have.
Member for Naparima, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up your contribution.
I'll take it. Madam Speaker, all we are saying is there is need for balance in the administration of justice for the police and prison officers. If they are increasing the penalties, they should also facilitate the detection of prohibited items within the prison. Make their life easier, and this speaks to detection. Because if you cannot detect, you could pass all the legislation in the world. We'll have a 2% detection rate and a 1% conviction rate. There should be an operational CCTV system within the prison to monitor the use of contraband items. Over the years, numerous videos have emerged, and the prison officers are saying they cannot monitor all the prisoners by walking around because their systems, when you turn the corner, they call their friend and things happen. Need to have that CCTV system. Madam Speaker, there are reports of poor lighting in prison cells. Trinidad Guardian, June 22nd, 2019. Prison Officer 1, Christopher Cozier, said that there is a lack of priority where dynamic security is concerned at the Golden Grove Remand Yard prison. He raised issues of lack of patrols, static security, poor lighting, and unmanned security towers. I suspect that they will be getting LED bulbs shortly, Madam Speaker, and that may assist Prison Officer Cozier in his concerns. Madam Speaker, right now, we heard we are doing this to protect the prison officers, but do you know that the majority of senior prison officers are in acting appointments right now? Only the Commissioner of Police and the 2 DC, the Deputy Commissioner of Police. And we are saying that this legislation, good, and we support it, but we are saying more needs to be done, Madam Speaker. More needs to be done. Madam Speaker, I spoke about the prison officers feeling that they're second-class citizens. And no offense, we must help the police officers to do their job. Yes. But a good mother cannot discriminate among her children. All should be treated equally, Madam Speaker. The prison fleet of vehicles is in tatters. The Trinidad Guardian, this is not Rodney Charles speaking.
While I don't want to get in the arena, I still have to ensure you comply with relevance. And I've understood what you're trying to say about the legislation not being all to protect them. But, going outside into the administrative aspects, in my view, is not relevant to the bill before us. So I'll ask you, Member for Naparima, to come back on
Madam
track.
Speaker, the point I was making was that there must be a little balance on both sides, and you cannot be coming here and punishing and whatnot, but at the same time not equally paying attention to the concerns of the person. Because we all here, this legislation purports to reduce crime. And if we are to reduce crime, we must have satisfied protection officers. Officers in the protective services.
But the point
I'll be closing shortly.
Yes, please. The point about it is not to reduce crime generally. It's within a particular kind of context. Okay? So as I said, I understood before what you're showing, that legislation is not all. Okay? And your point about detection and so on. But going into the things about the cars and so on, I'm not going to allow. Okay? So continue.
Thank you. I'm closing, Madam Speaker. And I'm closing by because my essential point is we support the bill. There's no need for me to go in clause by clause. We support this comma and this full stop. We have to say we support. But we have concerns. And these are our concerns. That's what we elected to do. Madam Speaker, I close by saying on April 6, 2016, Honorable Attorney General presented a report on the prison service reform. And this is in the context. These clauses are in the context of prison service reform. He listed a number of initiatives. Better operationalization of the prisons. Improve prison conditions through prisoner allocation and backlog management. Capacities of the judiciary, and he went on, I wouldn't go there. Operationalization of existing laws such as a system of electronic monitoring. Reduction in delays to determine criminal matters. 3.5 years later, none of these items have been adequately addressed. So we come here today to pass another law to increase fines. And it is clear that the government approaches to pass law and hope that the real issues are forgotten. PNM is a government, Madam Speaker, that talks. They talk, and they talk, and they pass legislation, but nothing happens, Madam Speaker. So they produce no concrete measurable results. I wish to reiterate, Madam Speaker, in closing, that we support the bill, notwithstanding some of our concerns which I have outlined in this debate. And I close with a quote used by a learned legal luminary of high dispute. Justice delayed. I quote, Madam Speaker, justice delayed is justice denied. But justice delayed is very expensive in every sense of the word. End of quote. The words of the Honorable Attorney General during the Prison Reform Public Consultation Forum dated April 6, 2016. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Well done. Well done. Madam Speaker, I rise to support the legislation before us, and I specifically rise to address the most astounding contribution from the member for Naparima. He always runs out of the chamber the minute I stand up because he can't take the licks. And I can promise him he's about to be intellectually flogged for the contribution that he just gave.
Oh, I love it.
And let's start off immediately. The honourable member ends by saying that the PNM passes legislation and nothing happens. His contribution goes on in a rambling sort of way to say that we must attend to the criminal justice system. Don't do legislation such as this. The member goes on to say that, and this is the one that I want to start off on. He said a good mother should not discriminate against her children. That's what the honourable member said. The honourable member said that in finding proportionality, we must listen to the Prisons Officers Association, and that he, as a representative of the UNC, has met with the Prisons Officers Association to treat with their concerns. So concerned with the honourable members of the Prisons Officers Association, or even members who are just simply police officers, prisons officers, etc. Madam Speaker, let me deal with the facts. First of all, the bill before us originated in a specialist committee which the then Minister of National Security, Minister Dillon, and I sat down and created specifically to address the concerns of the Prisons Officers Association. We started this work, as a matter of fact, as the record will demonstrate, in 2017. We did that because we went into the prison system, we engaged in a litmus test as to the reform that was necessary there, and we introduced to this country the statistics and empirical evidence for the first time put in the way that we did. Never before had the country been told what the state of remand looked like in terms of numbers, years on remand, category of offenses, and more particularly, what the cost to the taxpayers looked like. And when we invited the Prisons Officers Association to come to talk to us, to say, listen, we have discovered records which demonstrate that you have been effectively ignored for years. Come and sit on the table of the Office of the Attorney General and let's draft policy, prescription, and law together. They said to me, they said to Minister Dillon, they said to Minister Hines, who was then present, that we should have a careful regard for the fact that this is the first time this was happening. So let's deal with a mother, as the honourable member said a little while ago, Naparima said, that a mother, a good mother, should not discriminate against her children. I read from Prisons Officers Association of Trinidad and Tobago letter dated August 23, 2010, to the Honourable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, Prime Minister and Head of Security Council of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Request for an urgent meeting, matters in need of urgent attention with the prisons. The Commissioner and the matters included in the letter, the Commissioner of Prisons' failure to implement a walkthrough on baggage scanners, failure to implement use of camera systems throughout the prison system to monitor, minimize security breaches, Commissioner of Prisons' failure to effectively implement and maintain use of cell phone frequency jammers, failure to have regular searches conducted to rid the environment of, etc., difficult positions. Went on to say failure to reconfigure the entrance to the prisons to allow for control of vehicles, etc. Failure to ensure safe, secure, and appropriate conditions. Failure to allow approach for issuing service firearms. Casual handling of murder of prisons officers. Let me then go on. In another letter to Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, sometimes labeled as the mother of the nation by members of the UNC, letter dated August 23, 2010. There's another letter, June 5, 2013. Madam Speaker, what the letters demonstrate is a simple truth. Notwithstanding all the bravado and bold-facedness of the member for Naparima today, to say that you must proverbially, as the government acting through the Minister of National Security, have regard for the concerns of the Prisons Officers Association, the record shows that Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, the member for Siparia, received umpteen communication from the Prisons Officers Association on issues which Naparima stands today to say we should do. And what was the response? Absolutely nothing. So today we hear Naparima say, you must act with propriety. You must ensure that these things are done. He says he has deep concerns about the efficacy of the legislation. And what the member failed to tell us is that whilst in government, the UNC took absolute pride in doing absolutely nothing. What can we say today, Madam Speaker? We can say today the mischief that this bill attempts to treat with is quite simple. A prison must be a prison. A prison in today's world, a prison in Trinidad and Tobago, is a place where criminal empires flourish. Why? Madam Speaker, in Trinidad and Tobago, we had the expression in reference to prisons officers. Many years ago, our local colloquial reference to a prison officer was what? A turnkey. A turnkey. The prisons officer's job was quite simple. Go to work, turn the key to let somebody in or out of a prison cell. They were not treated with great respect. It was viewed to be a fairly secure environment. There was the risk, of course, to prisoner uprising, etc. But there was no real regard paid to the men in khaki uniforms who served as prisons officers. Today, on the other hand, Madam Speaker, those men and women, noble men and women of the Prisons Officers Association can speak to the fact that certainly, Madam Speaker, in the period 2010 to 2014, we witnessed something in the prison system. Madam Speaker, there have been, and I'll take you from the period 2009 to 2015, and I'll tell you what the member for Siparia and the member for Naparima sat on whilst doing nothing. 14 murders, 14 assaults, 81 death threats to prisons officers. No grabbers and jammers in operation. No new prisons built. We did a fence for $80 million. We spent $80 million to conduct a fence exercise around the prisons. But the members say to us today, we'll support the legislation, but it can't work. They say it can't work because we're not listening to the Prisons Officers Association. The Prisons Officers Association are on record 3 times in writing, umpteen agitation attempts, 14 murders, 14 assaults, 81 death threats, criminal empires growing. But let's deal with the major one. Madam Speaker, then Minister of National Security, Gary Griffith, sat where Aruka Maloney's seat is today, at position number 19, sitting in the Senate in those days. I know because I sat opposite him at number 6 position where Caroni Central is in the Senate.
I was 6.
And Madam Speaker, I was at 5, Minister Dialsing was at 6.
I was 6.
Madam Speaker, I can tell you what Minister Griffith as National Security encountered. He encountered the following expression: long live life sport. And long live life sport evidenced the UNC's refrain when a motion to condemn the life sport program was brought to treat with the prison situation, to treat with criminality, to treat with corruption, to treat with murder, to treat with tipping off. All of the things that we put into this legislation today, the answer coming from the UNC was long live life sport.
Yes.
We know that long live life sport is truly the refrain of the UNC because we see the personification of life sport now returned to work the corridor, to bring the UNC back into glory, Madam Speaker. So let's treat with this right now. We know that this bill proposes a very significant reform. Madam Speaker, there's 7 clauses in the legislation. The 7 clauses, contrary to the submissions made by the member for Naparima, are not to tweak a fine. They're not to raise the penalties. The honorable member clearly does not appreciate or know the difference between a new offense and an increase in fine. Madam Speaker, it is savagery to intellect to listen to Naparima refer to the new offenses of tipping off, the new offenses of retaliatory action, and call them a tweak in raising fines. That is obscene to anyone who pays attention to the difference between a new offense, which these provisions introduce, as opposed to tweaking of fines. The honorable member asked for an explanation on Section 60 of the Police Act, and says that the population needs to know why it is that they are going to be exposed to actually having an offense happen if they don't aid the police in enforcement. Madam Speaker, that has been the law since that law was put into effect. That is not new law, Madam Speaker, as Naparima ought to know had he bothered to consider the origin of the amendment. No, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the architectural overlay of introducing tipping off and of introducing retaliatory action to protect not only law enforcement officers, but their family members. It is the first time that we're doing that. Had the member for Siparia been here, we may have heard a response to how tipping off should be managed. The member is regrettably not here. Learned Senior Counsel, the member for Siparia, obviously cannot assist us on what a defense to tipping off looks like, because the honourable member surely well knows what it looks like in her interactions with the law, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is for that reason that we propose the amendments to the Prisons Act, the Police Service Act, the Immigration Act, the Fire Services Act, and the Customs Act. And we introduce specifically a harmonization from the Proceeds of Crime Act, Section 51, where the offense of tipping off is located, and in terms of retaliatory action and protecting the members of families of law enforcement officers, we are equating Section 15 of the Anti-Gang Act and Section 8 of the Anti-Gang Act when we deal with Section 15 of the Anti-Gang Act, treating with tipping off, and Section 8 of the Anti-Gang Act, Act number 1 of 2018, introducing the retaliatory offense for prisons officers, police officers, fire officers, immigration officers, customs officers, and their family members in an extended sense. Madam Speaker, the member for Naparima went further in his contribution. And the member said bold-facedly and incorrectly that we were going to create absolutely nothing of worth because we have not been focusing on the criminal justice system. Madam Speaker, where was the member for Naparima for the last 4 years, Madam Speaker?
In our bowel.
Madam Speaker, the honourable member for Naparima says that he's in the bowels.
He was in our bowel.
And in the course of his movement on this Parliament floor this evening, Madam Speaker, the honourable member made the submission that we were not paying attention to the criminal justice system. So let me put it on the record, because the honourable member went further to say nothing has happened. Madam Speaker, let's deal with the allegation that nothing has happened as we deal firstly with what the criminal justice system is. Madam Speaker, this law is being put to the Parliament now because this government, in its getting it done philosophy, says you cannot have successful outcome of laws unless you have plant and machinery, people, processes, and law. You must have all four. In dealing with the plant and machinery, Madam Speaker, people and processes, it's a matter of record that we have caused a quickening by creating the Family and Children Division, the Criminal Division, the Civil Division now standing on its own. We are coming with the Probate Division and the Small Claims Division. The Honourable Member obviously was absent in action when the Honourable Prime Minister said to the country that this Tower D, where this Parliament is located, will be the home of the civil courts, effectively yielding 60 new courts by the end of our term to have criminal matters dealt with. This member was absent when we passed the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act amendments to cause the conversion of offences to violations, allowing us to move 104,000 cases per year from the 146,000 cases per year out of this criminal justice system. This member, Naparima, clearly was absent in action when we passed the amendments to abolish the preliminary inquiries legislation, which will remove 26,000 cases per year from the magisterial system, leaving roughly 30,000 cases for 43 magistrates to deal with, as opposed to 146,000 cases for 43 magistrates to deal with. Naparima was clearly absent, sleeping, or in the middle of a movement when the Honourable Member failed to recognize that we have had 400 maximum sentence indications, where we have had a quickening of matters before the court. The member was again missing in action when 5 judge-only trials came to completion, for murder, for money laundering, for offences under the Proceeds of Crime Act, absent in action. The member was clearly absent when gang members were brought for prosecution before our courts. The member was clearly absent when the implementation of the bail amendments recently passed have caused the denial of bail for persons who are facing serious charges in the court. So, Madam Speaker, in dealing with the processes of the court, we take absolutely no advice from Naparima, because Naparima is clearly on a frolic of fantasy in the middle of a movement whilst he sits in the position of offering recommendations. Madam Speaker, let's get on to the member now saying that the government can have the benefit of the opposition support. Madam Speaker, the first draft of legislation that we prepared at the AG's office involved a 3/5 majority concern. We promptly removed that 3/5 majority issue because we were confident that Naparima would lead the charge on saying no to legislation. We sat down with the Prisons Officers Association over the period of 2 full years. We dealt with circulated draft legislation across the police service, fire officers, prisons officers, obviously, immigration officers, customs officers, and we sought to harmonize improvements into the law that would redound to the benefit. What does the bill do? The bill does 2 things. The bill, firstly, heavily criminalizes action against law enforcement officers. The bill, in allowing that heavy criminalization against law enforcement officers in the 5 categories that they stand, including immigration, allows their family members to be protected. On the other hand, the bill also heavily penalizes offenses committed by law enforcement officers. And why is that the case, Madam Speaker? Going back to the concept of the proportionate need for law to sit in balance, ensuring that there is a dissuasion against law enforcement officers who enjoy the privilege and fiduciary position that they have of having certain powers, we had to criminalize action. But clearly, Naparima doesn't listen to Commissioner Griffith. Commissioner Griffith and the Minister of National Security have both publicly stated the improvements to surveillance, the improvements to law enforcement intelligence, and Commissioner Griffith, up to yesterday, indicated the introduction of specialist law enforcement attorneys to be brought into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Naparima obviously was asleep when we dealt with the amendments to the SSA legislation in 2015, and by that legislation brought in intelligence services. But I can tell you, Madam Speaker, this bill is intended to be met with a very important bill that we will bring to Parliament shortly, and that is a bill to cause amendments to the Interception of Communication Act. And that effectively, Madam Speaker, is to allow for securing of traffic data, that is triangulation of positions. That is to allow for non-warranted interception of communication coming out of or into prisons. Because there is no reason whatsoever that a prisoner in a prison ought to have communications. A prison must be a prison. And Madam Speaker, when we propose the amendments here in Section 8 of the Prisons Act, by defining all of the prisons under which the prohibitions must operate, we will, at committee stage, propose the inclusion of child rehabilitation centers, because those are now a feature of our prison system as it relates to children. But when we deal with the insertion of new sections 8A and sections 8B in clause 3 of the bill, Madam Speaker, we are treating with using a definition coming from the Cybercrime Bill 2018 and 2017 to capture electronic devices all in nature, we have a lacuna in our law. Interception of communication is technically, and under this law, in need of support because it's only on a communications network, a telecommunications network. It does not include, and prior to these amendments that we propose now, communication devices beyond a communications network. In other words then, device to device. This law, in defining what prohibited devices are, includes the ability to use devices which are ahead of the curve. Prisoners today, Madam Speaker, don't communicate only via telephones. They use hotspots and they use devices. Madam Speaker, it's a matter of record that in 2016, I in fact came to this Parliament, and in April 2016, I informed the country that as a result of a raid conducted at the prisons, at which the member for Point Fortin and I were in attendance at a safe distance and without interference in law enforcement, having received a telephone call, I myself having received a telephone call from a prisoner on death row. As a result of searches conducted that day, devices were found, including a flat screen TV, ammunition, drugs, telephone devices, marijuana, cocaine, Madam Speaker, other forms of ammunition and offensive weapons. And Madam Speaker, those things didn't arrive there by themselves. So Madam Speaker, the cross-cutting provision for trafficking, the cross-cutting provision for tipping off, the cross-cutting provision for offenses and assault, Madam Speaker, across the Prisons Act, the Customs Act, the Immigration Act, the Police Service Act, and the Fire Services Act, they are meant to harmonize the position for all law enforcement officers. Madam Speaker, with that particular structure in mind, we heard the member for Naparima make a few other observations. The member went on to reflect upon certain pieces of law which I agree with him are driven in reflective terms by this proposal for amendment. He referenced the Anti-Gang Act, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the FIU, Customs and Exchange, Anti-Terrorism Act, bail amendments, and cybercrime. Madam Speaker, I'd like to put on the record, except for the 2011 Anti-Gang Act, all of these pieces of law originated from a PNM government, Madam Speaker. And all of these pieces of law have been amended by this government. And Madam Speaker, the member then went on to make a bold-faced statement to say that the law enforcement money allocation to Ministry of National Security under this government has been roughly about $8 billion per year, and failed to realize that the last government spent over $50 billion, Madam Speaker, on the same point. He sought to draw a distinction between the movement away from crime and criminality by making reference to things like the cadets and the scouts, etc. And then he sought to give a comparative ratio to say that the expenditure on law enforcement was disproportionate to the dissuasion. Madam Speaker, what I'd like to say is that under the operationalized systems that we have put into law, we, in getting it done, have opened 2 children's courts with 8 courts, Madam Speaker, between them. We, Madam Speaker, in getting it done, have had over 400 MSI matters completed. We, in getting it done, have increased the judicial complement in legislation by 76%. We, Madam Speaker, have taken the complement of masters up from 2 to case-managed criminal matters up to 15, Madam Speaker. We got it done. They didn't even dare to legislate it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we operationalized, in getting it done, the child rehabilitation centers. What they did, Madam Speaker, is to pass a law, proclaim it, and have no child rehabilitation centers. Let me make this one clear. Anand Ramlogan, then Attorney General for the UNC, saw the law for the creation of child rehabilitation centers. The cabinet of the UNC proclaimed the law, And then we were sued by H1n1 Ram Logan for not having child rehabilitation centers when the law was proclaimed. In other words then, left office and then went to sue for something that he should not have proclaimed. But Madam Speaker, it's worse than that, and I'll tell you why the amendment to Section 8 in Clause 3 of the law to include child rehabilitation centers is critical. Nobody in this country is reflecting upon the fact that there is an escapee from the Child Rehabilitation Center, otherwise called YTC, running in Trinidad and Tobago right now, who is the client of Gerald Ramdeen and H1n1 Ram Logan in their very applications to sue for failure to have child rehabilitation centers. We had to spend tax-paying dollars to the tune of millions of dollars to hear Mr. Ram Logan and Mr. Ramdeen say this particular child was not at risk of escape. But nobody pays attention to that. So number one, proclaim the law and don't have it. Number two, sue for not having it. Number three, take millions of dollars to pay, and then in fact, the child escapes. Madam Speaker, this is classic UNC behavior. Anything goes, Madam Speaker. Anything goes, Naparima style, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the fact is the child escaped by way of assistance. And, Madam Speaker, this bill proposes in Clause 3, in treating with prisons officers, to criminalize the action of prisons officers involved in that. And, Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased and very warmed to say that the Prisons Officers Association, under Mr. Seron Richards in particular, and the members of his association, those men have been fighting for reform, a lot of which is found in these bills. I would like to compliment the past Minister of National Security, the Minister then member for Point Fortin, and the current Minister of National Security for the first time with the coordination of the Commissioner of Police in granting firearms to prisons officers, something that they had cried for years, contained in the 3 letters to Mrs. Prasad Bisesa. It was this government that got it done, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the questions that are raised by Naparima saying prisons officers somehow have questions right now about the dormitories and their inclusion. Madam Speaker, the law is intended to capture the prisons as they are declared in law. And it's intended to do that, Madam Speaker, because the empirical evidence demonstrates that with the finding of contraband, marijuana for the purposes of trafficking, etc., they were found in the dormitory section of the prisons officers' accommodation. And we are confident that whilst there is a move to build dormitories away from the prisons so that we can eventually separate out the officers from the prisoners, Madam Speaker, at present, out of necessity, they must be rolled up in treatment. Madam Speaker, I would like to say that under the offender management legislation in England, prisons officers are not even allowed to take their phones into prison. There's no cell phone walking into a prison from a prisons officer in the United Kingdom. Those are left outside the prison, and you are confined to landline utilization with all calls being monitored.
Attorney General, your original time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up if you wish.
Yes, please, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are a few clauses that I'd just like to treat with, apart from the concept of prisoners, because this is much more. I've already put out the cross-application of tipping off, retaliation against family members, etc., across the 5 categories that we treat: customs, immigration, police, prisons, etc., fire. We've dealt with that. We've dealt with the increase in penalties, but as a cross-cutting reference to all 5 sections, Naparima obviously couldn't catch this point. I don't mean to be pejorative on this. He's not an attorney at law, but the point is that we have converted some of these offenses from summary alone instead, Madam Speaker, to now either way. And we created either way offenses because you can have a faster management of offenses in the summary court, in the magistrate's court. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to say, by way of evidence of the implementation of amendments that we made to the Proceeds of Crime Act. It was the movement to either way offenses that we actually have convictions for money laundering, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, those convictions are evidenced empirically. They have been reported to our international agencies. The Financial Investigation Branch has treated with that, Madam Speaker. So I don't know where NAPRIMA says that there's no evidence of law working. Madam Speaker, if I were to demonstrate any truth in what NAPRIMA says, I think the only thing that he said that made sense was that it is certainty of conviction as opposed to extent of offense exposure that is useful. And that is why, Madam Speaker, we, in getting it done, sought to catalyze the criminal justice system, not only by the creation of divisions of court, but, Madam Speaker, also by the merger of jurisdictions of court. In merging the summary court, the magistrates' court, with the High Court, we have now caused a quickening of justice, the abolition of preliminary inquiries, quickening of justice. Madam Speaker, very importantly, the introduction of criminal procedure rules. It is our government that got it done in 2016 in laying criminal proceedings rules. It is our government that got it done in birthing a public defender system, Madam Speaker. That building is being built out right now on Stanmore Avenue. We are aiming at January to have that opening so that defense counsel are available to treat with it. Madam Speaker, when we treat with the Criminal Law Act, it's very important, Madam Speaker, when we're looking at Clause 2. When we are amending, Madam Speaker, Section 6 of the Criminal Proceedings Act, I'd like to simply put that. Section 6 of the Criminal Proceedings Act is where you make a false report or you're wasting police time. I haven't taken a jab at Oropuch East for a while, but I'd just like to say that it's interesting that when we have, and yes, when we have false reports being made and the police coming out to clear the Honorable Prime Minister as they have, Madam Speaker, it might fall into this category. So I tell my learned friend, be a little bit careful. This law is not designed to be ad hominem. It is not the Oropuch East clause. It is intended to make sure people don't waste the time of the police, Madam Speaker. And in wasting the time of the police, I would just like to say I am very warned that the Financial Investigation Branch of the police, in an independent investigation, cleared the nonsensical allegations of our Prime Minister supposedly having some foreign bank account in Miami. Madam Speaker,
Big Marky boss.
Madam Speaker, let's just remind that Trinidad and Tobago is fighting a serious scourge, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the certainty of conviction is to be drawn from more resources. You need more courts. You need more judges. You need rules of court. You need to merge jurisdictions. You need to remove bottlenecks like road traffic offenses, like preliminary inquiries. You need to have defense counsel available. You need to have other aids to enforcement, such as having, if you can't catch hard crimes, go after the money. And Madam Speaker, all of these matters have been done by this government. Madam Speaker, one example, because NAPRIMA asked for it, of getting it done. Madam Speaker, usually a tax amnesty will yield over a 2 to 4 month period approximately $400 million in revenue. The tax amnesty, which was recently concluded, in 2.5 months netted $2.4 billion. 1.3 billion of those dollars came from the oil and gas sector. And Madam Speaker, the rest of it was largely warmed by the fact that we introduced into law the unexplained wealth order laws and the civil asset forfeiture laws. And Madam Speaker, I genuinely believe that those follow the money laws are the trick to transforming our society, Madam Speaker. Unexplained wealth orders apply in the context of this bill, because if we have prisons officers, police officers, customs, fire, immigration, in the course of their duty, found in circumstances where they have not returned state property or are the subject of bribery allegations, Madam Speaker, these laws can work in tandem with the unexplained wealth laws, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you have to have a law. You need to operationalize the law at the same time. What was missing in the UNC's management of our process is the application of a sensible rule: plant and machinery, people, processes, and then law. Madam Speaker, I think that the Honourable Minister of National Security did yeoman service in taking us through the provisions of the law itself. Even though the Office of the Attorney General had the pleasure of drafting this law, it is national security that implements it. And that is why the Honourable Minister ought to have the right of implementation and passage of this law. I am very pleased as a member of a government that works in tandem with each other to be a part of teamwork, Madam Speaker. A lot of getting it done requires teamwork, Madam Speaker. And in the continuum of exercise, member for Point Fortin, member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, member for Laventille West, I as the member for San Fernando West, member for Tobago East, in her discharge of the children's regime, which in part includes the management of child offenders, Madam Speaker. I am very pleased that we have the ability to bring positive law for the peace, order, and good governance of our society. I add to that, Madam Speaker, the work which the Minister of Youth and Sport and Youth Affairs is managing, as well as the work which Education and Social Development are doing, because they are driving, together with national security, the other work products. But Madam Speaker, it was the member for San Fernando East, and I'd like to pay him public tribute today. It was the member for San Fernando East who observed the need for the amendments to Section 60 of the Prison Service Act, of the Police Service Act. And that is where you call for civil aid in law enforcement. It was San Fernando East in our law reform, in our legislative reform committees, that pointed out what the United Kingdom had done when there would be a garrison sort of behavior and the need for the police to be able to push back by calling aid to enforcement. If you haven't noticed, Madam Speaker, there is a tendency, particularly in WhatsApp communications of videos, to show a sort of a garrison approach of communities when law enforcement turns up. And San Fernando East, in its contribution, allowed us at the Attorney General's office to find proper location for a cross-cutting measure across the 5 laws that we seek to amend. So I thank the honourable member for his contribution in that regard. Madam Speaker, I think that I have covered the response to the member for Naparima, as nonsensical intellectually as that contribution was, Madam Speaker, there being evidence that they sat and did nothing for a full 5 years and 3 months. And I also believe that it is with the support of the law enforcement officers themselves that this law stands as proportionate. I thank you.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, as I join this debate at this juncture. And having listened to the Attorney General, you would have felt that you need to sing, "Oh, how great thou art." Because the Attorney General attempted to paint a picture that they are the saviors as it relates to the Prison Officers Association and the Law Enforcement Officers in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. And this is a very important debate because on both sides, and especially on the part of the opposition, we understand our duties and responsibilities to the law enforcement officers in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is why my colleague, the member for Naparima, during his presentation, said that he had dialogue with the Prison Officers Association. That is the responsibility of the opposition under any democratic framework. And we have stated in his response to the Minister of National Security that we will support the bill. We want to see the bill work. We want to see its successes. At no point in time did my colleague say that he wants this bill to fail. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have that responsibility as an opposition to point out issues that come to the fore as it relates to the operationalization of any piece of legislation that is brought to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And when we speak because we feel that there is a government might listen to the concerns of the opposition, which is voicing the concerns of stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. But, you know, stick break in their ears so that they will not listen, because they have been a very arrogant, contemptuous, and disdainful government in the last 4 years. So that is why anything that comes from stakeholders, and in particular the opposition in discharging our responsibilities to Trinidad and Tobago, they feel it have a political slant it. There's no political slant when you listen to the Prison Officers Association, Madam Speaker. And more importantly, I want to, because, you know, the Attorney General, in attempting to be the savior for the Prison Officers Association, attempted to paint a picture that nothing was done under the partnership government to attempt to listen to the concerns of the Prison Officers Association. And I want to just highlight some of the work that was done, Madam Speaker, in responding to the Attorney General. Because I don't want to get into intellectually flogging the Attorney General. But I will put the issues to him, and I hope that after I put the issues to him, he will understand his role and function, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, under the watch of Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, my colleague, the member for St. Augustine, served as the Minister of Justice in his incarnation, in one of his incarnations at the cabinet level. And I want the Attorney General to tell me today if I am not speaking the truth, because the head of the Prison Officers Association, who was Saran Richards at the time, and still is Saran Richards, was appointed on a committee in tandem with the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Justice at the time, with the instruction to provide all available resources to start work and address the concerns of the Prison Officers Association. Namely, Madam Speaker, to address the issues of ventilation and lighting in keeping with the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Madam Speaker. And in this dramatic form and fashion, he attempted to tell this House and the population that there was no grabbers and there was no jammers and there were no prisons and so on. But I want to tell the Attorney General, and Attorney General, you must tell me if I am deceiving you, or I am deceiving this House, or I am deceiving the population of Trinidad and Tobago. When you met, and you are aware, I am putting it to you, you are aware that there was a portable grammar and jabber system under Minister of Justice at the time, the member for St. Augustine. I'm putting it to you. And in addition to that, when you became the Attorney General in tandem with the then Minister of National Security, that there was an acceleration in terms of the delivery and the installation of the grabbers and jammers. So you are merely piggybacking on the visionary work of the partnership government led by Kamala Prasad Bissesa. Madam Speaker, I do not know why I'm attracting all this attention at this point in time. Madam Speaker, the important thing is their deception and their deceit that they attempt to foster. They attempt to foster and perpetuate on the people of Trinidad and Tobago by not admitting that government is a continuum and they met projects when they came into office, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva South. Honorable members, it's now 4:30. We'll take the suspension now. We'll return in half an hour. We'll be back here at 5 o'clock.